I'm in Canary Wharf right now and I'm just headed to the new Asylum hotel that just opened up. It was all over the news last week. There were protests. Yeah, people are not happy about this. I'm a bit surprised that they actually put one in Canary Wharf because typically they tend to put them in more deprived areas. Canary Wharf is definitely not a deprived area. Now, this hotel might be in Canary Wharf, which is a very rich area, but it certainly does not look rich. Like, look at how run down that hotel is. All over the news, you had headlines that they were staying in 4-star hotels and that this is a expensive luxury hotel. Definitely does not look like that at all. Yeah, you can totally tell that this hotel is run down and not in the greatest of conditions, especially when you compare it against other hotels in the area. It kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. It's not a nice hotel. But there's this rumor, right, that asylum seekers are treated like kings and queens and they are lodged in these really expensive, luxurious hotels and they get everything for free, right? They can't be further from the truth. There's actually been a lot of criticisms when it comes to the conditions of these hotels. 51 asylum seekers died in asylum accommodation last year, largely due to suicide because of the horrible conditions. So what they do is they cram as many asylum seekers as they can in a room. They inflate the prices of the rooms as well. So these hotels are actually making a killing from all of these asylum seekers housed here. Alex Langsam, the chief executive and founder of Britannia Hotels, is worth approximately $400 million. Graham King, the founder of another asylum hotel company in the UK, one of the biggest hotel companies in the UK, Clear Spring Ready Homes, he's now become a billionaire because of the asylum crisis. So both of them are making bank because of all of these asylum seekers in these hotels. Interestingly enough, both of these men are Tory donors. What is the reason behind the hotel crisis? What is the reason why there are all of these asylum seekers in these hotels? I'm going to get into it. There's actually quite a few reasons, but a big one is because the Tories created this crisis. You have these two men getting incredibly rich because of the asylum crisis that was created by the Tories, and both of them donated to the Tories. Now, the focus when it comes to asylum seekers is the small boats, but the small boats only account for about 29% of all asylum seekers in the UK. So not everybody in this hotel came by small boat. Other asylum seekers come through other irregular methods like lorries. They also apply for asylum at airports. Also, if you're in the UK already and your country becomes unsafe while you're in the UK, you can apply for asylum as well. But I just want to talk about the small boats for a second because according to official government figures, 99% of small boat arrivals claim asylum. So that's like only 1% of small boat arrivals who don't claim asylum. But it's not like they're walking into the country on the beach. They're just, getting off a boat and coming into the country unchecked. That's not what's happening. I know that's the narrative that has been perpetuated in the media. That's not what's happening. They are being sent to detention centers where their biometrics are done. So their fingerprints are scanned, their photos are taken. They are basically made sure to not be dangerous, right? There is a whole screening process that is done to make sure that they're not dangerous. And if there's any sign that they could be dangerous, then they are held further in detention. So they're just not let go into the public, That is a huge misrepresentation of facts. The people in these hotels are screened, they're checked. A lot of them, when it comes to documents, a lot of them might not have documents because not everybody has a passport. This is why I don't like that argument. Well, they don't have passports. Not everybody in the UK has a passport. Over half of Americans don't have passports. Like 52% of Americans don't have passports, right? So like if the US were to ever be invaded, or if there was to ever be a war in the US, or if it was to ever fall under fascism, which it kind of currently is, like if Americans ever needed to flee the country because of their safety, would the ones who don't have passports be less deserving of safety? So the whole passport argument doesn't make sense to me. Now, smuggling gangs have been known to pressure asylum seekers to throw out their passport, so this is one reason why we need to get rid of the smuggling gangs. Just because they don't have their passport doesn't mean they're not a genuine asylum seeker, though, and I think that's really important to say. The Tories closed most of the safe routes for asylum seekers, so there used to be more safe and legal routes for asylum seekers to come to the UK because you need to be in the UK to claim asylum. They closed a lot of those routes. The Tories closed them, so now they don't really have any option but to come through irregular methods. One of the legal routes that is available is the family reunification route. So when a family member comes and claims asylum and successfully becomes a refugee, they're able to bring their family over, which is a huge reason as to why you see more men coming over in the boats than women and children, because that journey is dangerous. And it's not just crossing the channel, it's crossing all of Europe on foot. It's crossing the Mediterranean Sea into Europe. Women and children are particularly more at risk for human trafficking. So it's more dangerous for them to do the journey than it is men. So that's why it's typically men that you see on the small boats. They'll come over, apply for their family members via family reunification, and their family members, who are typically left at refugee camps in neighboring countries, they're not left in the country that they're fleeing from. They're left in refugee camps in neighboring countries, and they bring them over through safe means, through safe methods. So it's not all fighting age men. I don't like that term. They're also working age men as well. But why are they coming to the UK? Why can't they just stay in France? Well, according to the 1951 Refugee Convention, which is international law, they can actually choose to seek asylum in any country that they want, and that's so not one country is overwhelmed. Like, imagine if Ireland were to go to war or be invaded, or, imagine Ireland was unsafe for some reason. Would you want the entire country of Ireland to come to the UK, or would you want other countries to share the load of asylum seekers, right? So that's why it's written under international law. Imagine if France said, we're not going to accept any asylum seekers, and then it would all go on to Italy. Actually, 70% of all asylum seekers seek asylum in the first safe country. The UK only gets about 1%, less than 1% of all asylum seekers in the whole world. Asylum seekers might come to the UK because they know people here, they have friends and family here. It will be easier to assimilate and to get a job here because they know people here. They might know the language. A lot of the countries that these people come from were previously colonized by the UK, so because of that, they might know English. So there's multiple reasons as to why asylum seekers might come to the UK, but ultimately they can because they're allowed under international law. But I do want to talk about the Refugee Convention because I think that's incredibly important to understand why the UK needs to accept asylum seekers. The 1951 Refugee Convention was created after World War II because Jews were not accepted into other countries for refuge during the Holocaust. So as a result, 11 million Jews died in the Holocaust. That would have been preventable if there were asylum laws like we have today. You might think that it was just Nazi Germany that was anti-Semitic during that time. That's not the case. Countries around the world were anti-Semitic. They didn't want their countries overwhelmed by Jewish refugees. So they just said no. They said, no, we're not taking any Jewish refugees. And as a result, a lot of Jews couldn't escape Nazi Germany, so they died in the Holocaust. As a way to prevent that from happening again, the 1951 Refugee Convention was created along with its 1967 protocol. It basically states that anybody has a right to asylum, anybody has a right to seek asylum and seek refuge in any country they so choose. This applies to you and it applies to me as well. This is the part of the video where I'm going to piss a lot of people off because I'm going to say that if you voted for Brexit, congratulations, you contributed to the increase of small boats and the massive asylum backlog, which requires the hotels. But why did Brexit contribute to the asylum crisis? Well, Brexit meant the UK leaving the Dublin regulation. The Dublin regulation is an agreement within EU member states that allows EU member states to send asylum seekers back to other EU member states based on a certain criteria. Particularly for family reunification, if an asylum seeker claimed asylum in the UK but most of their family was in France, the UK would send them back to France. And also they'd send them back to their first EU member country of entrance. So that would mean that Spain and Italy would get a lot of asylum seekers. The UK also lost access to the Eurodac database, which is a database full of fingerprints of asylum seekers throughout the EU. So if someone had tried and failed to seek asylum in the EU, the UK would be able to track it via this database. The UK no longer has access to this database because of Brexit, so it's actually much easier for people to try and fail to seek asylum in other EU member states and then come to the UK and try to seek asylum here too. So yes, Brexit contributed to the asylum backlog and the increase of small boats. You can see perfectly clear that there was a dramatic increase after Brexit. There's a literal graph that I'm going to show you that proves that. But then also the Tories just tried to completely overhaul the asylum system and they hardly processed asylum claims, creating this or contributing to this massive backlog. They quadrupled government spending on the asylum budget. So when you hear of all of the millions that are being spent on the asylum budget, that's because of the Tories. And who is profiting from this? Well, the Tories' donors, the hotel owners, and obviously the Tories, because, you know, they donated to the Tories. So basically, the Tories made a whole mess of the asylum system. They increased the boats, they created the backlog, which requires all of these hotels, and instead of owning up to it, they started blaming the migrants. Also, this narrative that Nigel Farage and the right-wing media are trying to push, that these people are illegal immigrants, is just wrong. They're not illegal. Seeking asylum is legal under international law. Asylum seekers and refugees only account for about 7% of all migration to the UK, and less than 1% of the entire UK population. So they're making it out to be like it's this invasion, like all of these people are coming over, when really it's not much at all in comparison to the rest of immigration. The majority of immigration to the UK is visa regular immigration. But the main focus needs to be clearing the backlog, because the backlog is not fair on the taxpayer, it's not fair on the migrants who have to stay in these hotels for sometimes years. They're not allowed to work, they don't have a lot to live on. The government gives them £49 and 18 pence a week if their asylum accommodation doesn't include food. If it does include food, they get £8 and 86 pence a week. So that's hardly anything. So it's not just for the taxpayer, it's also for humane conditions, and nobody thinks about that because the narrative in the media is that these people are dangerous, these people are bad, they're bad people, which is just not true. It's just not true. All of the misinformation that is coming out about these hotels, about the migrants in these hotels, about the small boats, is coming from right-wing media sources with an agenda. They want you to think that these people are dangerous. They want you to think that the small boats are, you know, a result of just more people wanting to come to the UK for benefits, when that's just not true at all. And that's why I'm here to combat that misinformation, because that misinformation is what's leading the rise in fascism. So if you like what I'm doing, if you learned something, please drop me a subscribe, and I will be making more of these videos, because I can't stand this country that I love, the UK. I can't stand it being overthrown with fascist ideology.